Hello everybody, this is John the Bike Guy coming to you again, and today we're going to be talking about the most complicated topic as far as compatibility goes with your bike and your fork. It's called a headset. It's the bearings that allows your handlebars to turn. They go around your fork. It's the interface between your fork and your frame. And in this video I'm going to talk about the four different main styles of headsets, how to determine what you have, what you need. If you have just a bare frame, you can go from there. Basically what you're going to need a caliper for sure. So if you don't have one, buy one. There are some other methods on how to determine what kind of headset your bike is going to need, but this is the foolproof method, and it's hard to beat actual dimensions and numbers, and that's why I choose to do it this way. We're going to be talking about the four styles, we're going to be talking about conversions, we're going to be talking about compatibility, the different types, how they work, everything related to headsets. So let's get started. Before we get started, as far as compatibility goes and the different types, if you're going to be buying a headset, I recommend buying a complete one that has all the parts that are meant to work together. It's going to matter as far as bearings and your races. So a lot of times you'll find that the races aren't compatible with your bearings, depending on what kind of bearings you got. So try to buy a complete one that's all made to work together. Let's get started with the anatomy of a headset. I'm going to start with an external type threadless. That's probably the most common, and it has all the parts that all the other threadless headsets got. So let's start with this. I already have a crown race on this fork. I'm not going to remove it. It's a pain in the butt, but it's on there, it presses on, and that's going to interface with your lower bearing. So it's on here already. So in here I have a bearing. Sometimes they're out. This one's pressed into this cup, so it's not going to come out, but we have the lower bearing, and then we have the lower cup. So we're going to put that on like this, and then pretend your frame is in here. All right. I'm going to put the upper cup on, and then it's got the bearing in it already, like the other one. And then we have the split ring. It's kind of I call it the upper race. It slides on and interfaces between your fork and your bearing, so there's no slop in it. And then we have the upper cap. Okay, this goes on and covers it and makes it look clean. All right, and then after that you can add headset spacers like this. All right, and on the inside I already have it installed on this fork, but this is called a star nut. This is unique to threadless forks only. You pound it in. It's a specialty star nut. It comes in 1 inch diameters, 1 1/8, 1 1/2, depending on what kind of fork you have. You pound it in, oops, and it installs on the inside, and you can't pull it out. So, all right, that's in there now. And then you take your threaded or your threadless stem, all right, and ideally you're going to want to have it just a little bit underneath after everything is said and done. So when you cut your fork, your stem has to be taller than your steer tube. All right, so then we have our top cap and bolt. All right, so if our frame was in here, what this top cap and bolt does is it squeezes everything together, makes it tight, removes all the slop, and then these pinch bolts on the side tighten it down and lock it in so that when you turn the handlebar, it makes the fork move in relation to the stem. So that's how a threadless system works. Okay, now that I've shown you the anatomy of a threadless system, we're going to talk real briefly about threaded systems. It's basically the same parts that you saw before, only with a couple differences, okay? We have our crown race on already, all right? The bearing is right there. Here's our lower cup. It's already pressed into the frame. Okay, and then we put in our upper cup, which is already in the frame. Then we have our upper bearing. And then what this is the upper race. Okay, we're going to thread this on. Hopefully. Here we go. And we're going to turn it until it's just snug. You don't have any more slop in the bearings like that. Okay, and then you're gonna have this little washer thing. It's got a little key way that goes on the back side on this fork. Goes like that. And then we have this upper cap that is threaded, and we're going to thread that on just like this. And the biggest difference is that we have threads on top, and we have this upper nut that goes on and threads on too. And we don't have a star nut in here. We don't need a star nut on threaded systems. So basically how it works is I have the lower cup tightened, I have the upper cup pretty much all the way tight, and you would take a really big wrench like this and then hold the bottom one with either a channel lock or another wrench like this, depending on what kind of headset you have. You hold the bottom one stationary, and then you turn the top one against it clockwise, and that locks these two pieces together and keeps it from moving in the future. And that is how a threaded system works. Okay, let's get started with our first kind of threadless headset. We're going to start with those first because that's probably what most of you have out there. We're going to talk about the external threadless headset, and the reason why it's called external, and I'll get to that in a little bit. We're going to first start with what the head tube of an external threadless headset looks like. This part of the frame is called your head tube, okay? And we can see on the inside it's just basically it's just a straight hole. There's nothing, you know, unique about it. It's just a straight hole. So when we put this cup in, this part is going to insert into the frame, all right, just like that. And when it gets pushed in, we can see that it's going to bottom out here, and this part's going to sit external to the frame. That is why it's called an external headset. The bearing in the cup is going to sit outside the frame. It's pretty simple, right? External. Okay, let's get into our next type of headset. This one's called the integrated headset. It's fundamentally the same as our external types, but one big exception. Before we had cups like this, and they thought, well, let's just build the cups into the frame. You know, it looks nice and clean. You don't ever have to install them or take them out. So how you can tell an integrated head tube is by this kind of feature. It's got something that a bearing can sit into, like this. It's not just a straight tube. We can see the hollow part right here, but it's got this extra little bit that's been machined to hold a bearing, just like that. The cups are integrated into the frame. That's why it's called integrated. It's pretty simple, right? All right, let's get started on the last of our threadless headsets. This one is a combination, a hybrid between external and integrated. This one is called the internal / semi-integrated headset. That's its official name, internal / semi-integrated. Before we had our external type frame here, you can see that the cups would sit outside and the fork would basically go through. On this one, we have pressed the cups, but once it gets installed, the bearings are going to sit inside the frame. That's why it's called internal. And the reason why it's called semi-integrated is because what these cups do is effectively turn this frame into an integrated frame, but it's not fully integrated. It's not part of the frame, it's a cup. So you can tell one of these because it's much bigger. Not only does the fork have to go through it, but the bearing has to be inside as well. And obviously this has thickness, so that's why it is bigger. All right, and that is the last of our threadless headsets. We're going to move on to the last of all the kinds of headsets, is the threaded. The last little step of our threadless adventure here, we're going to be talking about star nuts and compression plugs. These go inside your fork, inside your steer tube. This kind happens to be for aluminum and steel steer tubes, okay? You do not want to put one of these in a carbon steer tube, all right? Do not do that. What for carbon, we have a different kind. It's a little more gentler, and it's not too bad. It's a lot easier to install. You don't need a special tool. What happens, it goes inside your steer tube, and then it expands out, and this part stays in, and when you want to tighten it, this top cap goes on, just like that. They have a number of styles, but this is a compression type, and it might come in different sizes depending on what size diameter steer tube you have. All right, and this one as well, this one's made for 1 1/8. They make them for 1 inch, they make them for 1 1/2, and probably one for 1 1/4 if you one of the weirdos out there that has one, but that is it. Okay, let's talk about threaded headsets. This is my least favorite. In fact, I absolutely hate it. I think it's garbage. And if you want to convert, you can to threadless. You're going to need a different fork. You're going to need a different stem and stuff. But if you're a bike nerd like me, you're going to get rid of that piece of crap. All right, so the difference is it's got threads on the frame, just like this, or on the fork. I mean, I'm sorry. Just at the top is going to come in different lengths, and it's got to be exactly the right length for your frame plus the stack height of the headset. It's really a massive pain in the butt to figure out, and it's just hard to adjust. You need special wrenches. You can't get away with just your 4, 5, 6 millimeter Allen wrench. You got to have a special set of wrenches, and adjusting the tension usually takes a couple tries. It's just really a bad design. But if you have an older bike and you want to, if it's actually a good older bike, or maybe you have your kid's bike and you just don't want to spend any money, this is what one will look like. It's going to have a totally different stem than our threadless headsets. It's going to have a quill stem, all right? And this inserts into your frame. This comes in different diameters. This is a 1 inch one, so the inside diameter is probably 22.2 millimeters. This one happens to go on 1 1/8 threaded, so it's 25.4. This goes into your frame. This top bolt picks up this wedge nut and it expands inside here, and that's what holds it all together. The pluses of this maybe is that you can get stems that come out a long ways. That's the one advantage to this style. That's probably the only advantage. I'm sure I'm going to get hated on for my hatred of quill stems and threaded systems, but you can tell the difference by the fact there's no pinch bolts on the side. There's only a bolt on the top, and this happens to be our threadless stem. You can see our pinch bolts on the side. So if you have these right now on your stem, you have a threadless system. So that's basically the end of the 4 different types of headsets. I hope you enjoyed that part, and we're going to move on to some other interesting things right now. Oh darn, I forgot to tell you, and maybe in my bashing of threaded systems, I forgot to show you what the head tube looks like in here. This basically looks exactly the same as an external threadless. It's just a straight hole. It's a little bit smaller than all the other ones. It's just a straight hole, and external cups go in just like that. Every single threaded headset is going to be external. There's no other types, so food for thought. Let's talk about steer tube diameters. The steer tube is the part of the fork that goes through your frame and attaches to your stem. The outer diameter of this can change. They come in different diameters just to make your life easier, I guess, almost. No, I guess not, but it's got an outer diameter. There's standards. This one happens to be a 1 1/8. If I were to measure the outside of this here, from here to here, it would be 1 1/8. I'm not going to get the caliper out to show you, but they usually start out at 1 inch, and they go to 1 1/8 straight, and then after that they have a 1 1/2 straight, which is a really monster downhill kind of a steer tube, and then we have the tapered varieties that start off at 1 1/8, and it can go down to 1 1/4, 1 3/8, and the most popular tapered is 1 1/8 to 1 1/2 lower. So when I talk about all this, we're talking about the diameter of the steer tube. The outer diameter is going to be that number. So it's really important to know when you're trying to pick a headset. Let's get into the part where we can identify what we have, the dimensions that we're going to need to record to figure it out. You're going to need one of these. It's just a simple caliper. You buy them on Amazon for 10 to 20 bucks. This one happens to be a digital one, so Let's turn it on. All right, step number 1, we have to record the steer tube diameter at somewhere at the top. This one happens to be 1 1/8 or 28.6 millimeters. All right, we're gonna wanna write that down, okay? The next part, we want to record the diameter of this crown right here, and that corresponds to your crown race diameter. We're gonna measure this. Should come up to 33 millimeters, let's see. We're gonna put it on there and measure, no, it's 30 millimeters for this. So we wanna measure this, we wanna measure that, and the next part we want to measure is the frame itself. We want to measure the inside diameter of both the upper and lower part of your head tube. Just like this. We're going to put it in there. We're going to put it in there and see this one's almost 44 millimeters. And we're going to measure the bottom one. Just like this. It's almost 44. 43.95, okay? We're gonna wanna write those down. Those are the 4 dimensions you really gotta have to determine your headset compatibility. All right, I have my data sheet here, and we wrote down our dimensions before. It's basically as simple as figuring out what your head tube inner diameter is, and then matching it to a cup or something, or a bearing that's going to fit inside there. It's basically going to have the same diameter. So if your head tube inner diameter is 30 millimeters, we're going to have to pick a headset that has that exact same dimension where it's going to go into the frame. And that is why my method, I think, is foolproof, because this doesn't lie. You can ask somebody, if you have a name for a headset, that's just arbitrary. Numbers do not lie. So that's why I'm picking this method and why I use it personally. I think it's the best way of figuring things out. So for a sample problem, let's say we measured our inner head tube diameter to be 30 millimeters. We're going to start with the inner head tube diameter. And then we're going to measure our crown race diameter. Let's pretend it was 27. Okay, we know these two numbers match, so we go over to the left and we see, oh, I probably need to run a 1-inch GAIS headset in there. And then when we pick in our headset, we can ask the manufacturer or the seller or whoever we're buying this thing from, can you measure this for me, please? Or maybe you can find the dimensions online. But as far as 1-inch GAIS, it's pretty standard. There aren't that many different variations on it, so you're pretty safe. So with all these headsets, with threadless external to semi-integrated internal to integrated, it's all going to fall with the same system. And I'm going to attach this part to all the different headset videos, other than just the long version. So this is how we're going to do it. Start with the inner head tube inner diameter, work your way out, pick a headset that's going to match. It's going to tell us what kind of fork we can use in it if you just have a bare frame, and we'll go from there. Okay, let's talk about the common threaded head tube inner diameter frames and headsets that go along with it, okay? So, start with our 1-inch GAIS. We have a 25.4 millimeter outer diameter steer tube, which just corresponds to 1 inch. And we're gonna have a 30 millimeter inner diameter head tube, and we're gonna have a 27 millimeter crown race diameter, okay? That's the 1-inch GAIS. That's the most common 1-inch headset on the planet as far as threaded goes. And then we have our ISO, which is kind of a weird one. They do make them, but this is a 26.4 millimeter crown race and a 30.2 millimeter head tube inner diameter. Same 1-inch outer diameter, but you just don't want to try to mix these two up if you're buying a 1-inch threaded headset. You want to pay attention to these two. And as far as 1 1/8 outer diameter steer tubes, if we measured our frame inner head tube diameter to be 34 millimeters, our crown race diameter is 30 millimeters, we've pretty much got to run a 1 1/8 inch fork and a cup set that's going to match the inner diameter of this. And that's pretty much it. There's There was one fork made bigger than this. It's called 1 1/4, but it's not very likely that you have it. So as far as threaded headsets go, it's pretty simple. It's going to be one of these three or some rare one. If you have that, you know, throw your bike away, do the world a favor. It's weird and it's old and it's probably pretty junk. So sorry, that's my threaded headset rant. So yeah, it's pretty simple. Go off these numbers, figures out what kind of fork you can use, figures out what kind of headset cup you're going to need, and go from there. Okay, let's get into our common threadless external head tube inner diameters. And we can tell it's going to be one of these because we're running around a threadless fork. It's pretty simple. So we're going to start out with our very rare threadless variety here. If we measure our inner head tube to be 30 millimeters, our crown race diameter to be 27, and steer tube is 1 inch, we're going to run a 1 inch headset in a cup set that has the outer diameter of the cup where it presses into the frame of around 30 millimeters. It's pretty simple. And then we're going to move on to our 1 1/8. Head tube inner diameter is 34, crown race diameter is 30, and our steer tube diameter is 28.6 millimeters. We're going to run a 1 1/8 inch fork straight all the way down. And we're going to get into the bigger varieties, and this kind of complicates things because we could have a tapered frame or tapered fork and frame where the upper is different from the lower. So we're going to pick one from here, and we're going to pick one from here if we have a tapered frame. So let's get into the 1 inch varieties. Our crown race is going to be 39.8 for both of these 1/2 inch ones. Head tube inner diameter for one of them is going to be 44 millimeters, and then we're going to have one that's a little bit different with 49.6. This one's basically for really heavy duty downhill headsets. And when we're picking one of these, we're going to find a head tube inner diameter. We're going to measure our cup. It's pretty simple. If the head tube inner diameter is 34, this part that inserts in the frame also has to be 34. You know, it's simple, basic thinking. So from there, we can decide if we have a different measurement on the bottom than the top. We have a tapered frame. If it's the same on the bottom and the top, then we have a straight. And from there, we can pick what kind of fork we can use from it. It could be a 1 1/8, 1 1/2 lower. Pretty simple. Just use these numbers to figure it out. All right, let's get into our internal and semi-integrated head tube inner diameters. This is actually pretty simple. For the most part, we're going to have a 1 1/8 inch straight is pretty much always going to be 44. The most common tapered is 44 mixed with a 55.96. Or 95, sorry. It's different up here, but so if our measurements are 44.05, we can run a 1 1/8 inch fork upper for sure, maybe the whole way straight. Use this system to figure it out. So if we have a 44.05 upper and lower inner diameter and a crown race diameter of 30, we're going to be running a 1 1/8 inch fork, and our cup set must match. This isn't a cup, but where do I got one of those? Here we go. This happens to be a 44. This part is going to insert into the frame, so it makes sense that this has to be 44 as well. It's pretty simple, basic math. So let's just go through our numbers here. We got 1 1/8, 28.6, which is just the translation of 1 1/2 or whatever into millimeters. And we have our head tube inner diameter, 44.05, crown race 30.0. And we have this one. These two are pretty rare, these 1 1/8 ones. We have a 41.45 and we have 43 different varieties. These would be different headsets, but they all have a 30 millimeter crown race diameter. And we could have a tapered head tube where the bottom is bigger than the top. And I've only ever seen this one variety, 55.95 millimeters for the inner diameter of your head tube on the bottom. It could be at the top if you have a 1 1/2 inch straight, but that's pretty rare. Crown race diameter 39.8. And that would be for a 1 1/2. So when we pick our cup set, we're going to have to match this measurement here. is where it goes in the frame. Like I said before, for tapered, choose an 1 1/8 inch upper and a 1.5 inch lower, which is only this size as far as I can tell. The most common straight one is this one up here, and the most common tapered is 44.05 mixed with the 56 or 55.96 millimeter lower. Pretty simple, and that ends the internal / semi-integrated head tube inner diameters. All right, let's get into integrated head tubes and inner diameters and their bearings. Instead of cups, we're going to have to measure the outer diameter of our bearings, or the inside part of where the frame is going to come in contact with this bearing. See, this one is a 40.95, somewhere around there. So it's basically 41. We're going to use, this one. It happens to be a 36 by 45, and I knew that just because of that measurement there. So, all right, so we have our measurements. Okay, we're going to measure our frame, we're going to measure our crown rest diameter, and we're going to use this chart here to figure out what you need. And I'm just going to talk about them so I don't have to leave this up here forever. We have a 36 by 45, which has an outside bearing diameter of 38.0. Our head to inner diameter is just going to be 0.2 millimeters bigger. It's going to be a 36 by 45. It's a 25.4 steer tube and a 1-inch steer tube. So if we measured our inner head tube diameter to be 38.2, we pretty much have to use a 1-inch. Our bearing is going to be a 36 by 4.45, and we're going to go from there. So let's go on to the more common varieties. We have a 36 by 36. It has a head tube inner diameter of 41.7, a bearing outer diameter just 2.2 millimeters less. Crown race diameter is going to be 30, and from there we can figure out what kind of fork we can use and what kind of headset we need. 1/8, 28.6, 36 by 45, same crown race diameter, 41.0, so it's a little bit smaller than our previous one. And then we have a head tube inner diameter just a little bit bigger. And we'll switch to our 45 by 45. This one's fairly common in integrated bearings. It's bigger, so we can't use this bearing in any of the other ones. It's a 41.8, 42.0 millimeter head tube inner diameter, 30 millimeters, same as it was before. 28.6, 1 1/8. Okay, we got our 1 1/4. This is really weird. If you have one, I'm sorry, but your bearing is going to be 46.8 millimeters on the outside. Your inner head tube diameter is going to be 47.0, a 45 by 45. In a 1 1/4, your steer tube is going to be 31.8. And we're going to get into 1.5 inch. This is pretty much just going to be tapered head tubes from now on. For a lower, it's going to be mixed with one of these up here with one of these down here. This is the most common one. This is a 36 by 45. It's got the crown rest is going to be 39.8 at the bottom. Our bearing outer diameter is going to be 51.8, and our head tube inner diameter is going to be 52.1. Okay, we're going to pick these bearings with our frame. And this one's kind of a weird bearing. It doesn't have any angles on it really. It's just sort of your normal standard cartridge bearing. 52 millimeters outer diameter of your bearing, 52.02, just a little bit bigger. It's going to be pressed in, I'm guessing. It doesn't have any angles. It's industrial. Same diameter of your steer tube down on the bottom. 1.5 inches. So these two are probably going to be tapered, mixed with 1 1/8 inch up at the top. And if you want to know, you can tell that you have an integrated head tube by the structure inside your head tube. It has bearing holders. Okay, you can determine the angles by the bearing's outer diameter. So if it has this, we can figure out the angles from this. These are linked, so you're not going to find a 45 by 45 with an outer diameter of a 36 by 36. It's just not going to happen. So that's how we determine what angles we need. And if the angles match, you can use bearings from internal headsets in an integrated head tube. If, let's say, you had one before and you got a new frame, you might be able to use the ones from your old frame in here, which would be kind of nice. Let's talk about conversions now, and I'm going to talk about the threaded to threadless conversion. This is probably the easiest way to do it. What it is this inserts into your fork like a normal quill stem would. This part has the diameter of the stem that you're going to match it with. So basically you can use a threadless stem from there on out. It might look a little cleaner, a little nicer looking. This comes in different diameters depending on what kind of fork you have. This one would come in different diameters depending on what kind of stem you want to use. That's probably the easiest way. It doesn't require you to buy a whole bunch of things, just this one thing and a stem. But if you wanted to make the whole headset convertible, you're going to need a different headset altogether. You're going to need one made for threadless, which is basically the same thing, except for the top part's going to be totally different. You're going to need a new fork because your old fork is not going to be long enough. It doesn't stick out enough to attach the stem to. You're going to need a new stem. But if you have a 1 1/8 or 1 inch threaded system, you can convert to threadless pretty much always. All right, let's talk about one more conversion. That'll be the only other conversion I talk about. And it's going to be how to use a straight 1 1/8 fork in a tapered head tube. There's a couple options. Hope, that's a company, it's called Hope. They make a crown race adapter, which basically slides down onto your 1 1/8 inch fork, and it makes your diameter the same diameter as this big guy down here. See, obviously this wouldn't work without that adapter. So you would do this, and then you can run your normal tapered headset with it. They also have special cups if you have a semi-integrated internal frame where the base, where it's filled in except for the little bit at the end. So it would basically be, turn it into that, and your bearing would be 1 1/8 inch lower. You can use your standard crown race that comes with that. That's one way. And this is probably the coolest way. I think it's the simplest way. You could slide this down. It has the inner diameter of a 1 1/8 inch 30 millimeter crown race, but it's got the contacts for a normal 1 1/2 inch cartridge bearing. And they also make that for loose balls. So that is the conversion. That would be how you would run a straight fork in a tapered 1 1/8 to 1 1/2 inch lower frame. And that's pretty much it for conversions. All right, this is John the Bike Guy. I'm going to finish up the video. I think we've exhausted my patience and probably your patience after watching this long ass video. You're going to need one of these. You're going to have to use your power of deduction and my data here to choose a headset and determine what kind of fork can go in that and what your frame is based around. It's pretty simple. And with that, I just want to say happy trails, riding, whatever you call it in YouTube world, around the globe. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want. I'm always happy to have subscribers. Comment if you want. I usually answer them unless they're mean, and then you might get something mean back, but you know, you never know. I might just ignore you, you know. But anyways, John the Bike Guy, happy riding, happy trails, everything. God bless.